Why do you think it's a good idea to cut Medicaid for low-income and working-class people by $700 billion to give $235 billion in tax breaks to the very, very, very richest people in this country, perhaps a few hundred families?
Senator, I don't know, but the Democrats had the trifecta, and there was no tax increase or wealth tax on billionaires.
This is nothing more than a gift to billionaires in this country.
Well, sir, that's just not correct, because the top 10% paid a bigger share of taxes after TC.
Senator Bernie Sanders, one of the longest-serving independents in congressional history and the former chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, has spent decades campaigning against income inequality. In a recent hearing, he laid out what he described as the moral consequences of President Trump's economic agenda. According to Sanders, the Trump administration includes numerous billionaire officials, and the legislation currently before Congress would provide an estimated $235 billion in tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans by significantly reducing the estate tax. Sanders argued that these tax cuts would primarily benefit a small number of the nation's richest families. To offset the cost, he said, the legislation proposes major reductions to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, amounting to hundreds of billions of dollars in spending cuts. He pointed to estimates from the Congressional Budget Office, which project that millions of Americans could lose their health insurance if the bill becomes law. Sanders also referenced research from Yale University and the University of Pennsylvania, which suggests that reduced healthcare coverage could contribute to tens of thousands of additional deaths each year. During the hearing, Sanders challenged Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to explain and defend the legislation, questioning how such trade-offs could be justified. Watch the exchange.
Help me out here. My understanding is the Trump administration has, I think, 13 billionaires in office right now, leading government agencies. Is that about right, do you think?
I have no idea, Senator.
I think that's what the number is. Do you think it's a coincidence, given the large number of billionaires in the Trump administration, that this particular piece of legislation would provide $235 billion in tax breaks to the top 0.2% by expanding the exemptions in the estate tax?
Senator, I will tell you that when the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed, my tax rate went up.
Well, I don't know your exact situation, but I can tell you. Tell me about how many people do you think are in the top 0.2%?
Sorry?
Number of people in the top 0.2% who would benefit from this particular $235 billion tax break.
Well, the top, I know the top 10% is right. now paying 7%.
That's not the question.
The total tax.
My question is, why do you think at a time of unprecedented income and wealth inequality, when people like yourself economically have never ever had it so good, why do you think it's a good idea to cut Medicaid for low-income and working-class people by $700 billion to give $235 billion in tax breaks to the very, very, very richest people in this country, perhaps a few hundred families? Please justify that and tell me about that.
Well, Senator, I don't know, but the Democrats had the trifecta, and there was no tax increase or wealth tax on billionaires. You choose.
I'm not talking about a tax.
You chose not to do that.
Mr. Bessent, I am not talking about a wealth tax. Explain. A few hundred of the wealthiest families in this country, $235 billion tax break. Explain to the American people why you think that's a great idea.
I think that this will increase small businesses substantially. That most small businesses, they are...
Has zero to do with, come on, you're smarter than that. This is the top 0.2%. This is not a mom and pop store. These are multi-billionaires, and the savings go to their kids after they pass away. This is nothing more than a gift to billionaires in this country.
Well, sir, that's just not correct, because the top 10% paid a bigger share of taxes after TC.
I'm talking about one provision in this. I don't want to argue with you about taxes in general. One provision, few hundred families, $235 billion in tax breaks. You can't justify that because morally it is totally unjustifiable. Let me ask you another question. If you guys want to cut $1 trillion in Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, the estimate from CBO, I believe, is that over 15 million people lose their health insurance. Yale University and the University of Pennsylvania estimated that when you throw that many low-income and working-class people off of health care, some 50,000 people a year will die. Tell me why you think it's a good idea to give tax breaks to billionaires and allow 50,000 low-income and working-class people to die unnecessarily?
Senator, first of all, that's overstated by 5.1 million. That is not attributed to this bill. It is simply
It's a combination. That's true.
No. You all had a scheduled expiration of Obamacare subsidies, and you did not extend that when you were in charge. 5.1 million, 1.4 million illegal aliens on Medicaid.
All right,
and there are work requirements. And our goal is to get more money to children and mothers.
Really? Your goal is to get more money to children, and working people. Really? Come on. Do you know how many people, and I was surprised to hear this, I don't know if you know it or not, how many people lose their jobs every year, quit, get fired or whatever? Do you have any idea?
Well, there's something called the quits rate, and so when the job market is strong, more people quit.
But yeah, I was surprised that I just researched this. I don't know. Do you happen to know?
I don't know the number.
I was surprised. Would it be shocking to you? It was to me. 20 million people leave their jobs a year. Doesn't shock you, right? It's a big labor force, right?
Yep.
So somebody leaves the job, maybe they move, maybe something happens in their lives, right? We have a lot of transition in the labor market, correct?
Maybe they get a better job.
Right, exactly, maybe they do. Or maybe they have to stay home, their wife gets sick, whatever, we don't know. But 20 million people lose their jobs in a given year, leave their jobs in a given year. Are those people lazy? What happens when I leave my job and maybe I have to move to another state to take care of my ill mother? And I desperately need Medicaid. Am I too lazy now to be able to get Medicaid?
I think that's a mischaracterization of the work requirement.
Really? Well, I'm not quite so sure it is. I don't, okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, my main concern is, I think, what people are looking at the economy. The first 100 days, lowest stock market since Richard Nixon, not usually a measure people are shooting for. On tariffs, the fact that last year we had an effective rate of about 2.5%. I think the Yale Budget Lab, and I believe you went to Yale, has said that effective rate is closer to 28%, the highest since 1901. I know that some of that's changed because the tariffs are on again, off again, some on again, some off again. Somewhat chaotic, I believe, as your term is, what, Crazy Ivan style. I compare them to how a monkey throws dung. You're not exactly sure where they're going to land. And that's the concern I have as a small business owner, and I know Ms. Lusenkamp-Perez is as well. I've got small businesses really worried. You made a comment about while cargo volumes have dropped 60%, you see this as a temporary detox. But for a small business that's getting by day to day, that's much bigger. You talked about Main Street. We want to finally focus on Main Street, not Wall Street. I think you were at a global investor conference in Beverly Hills yesterday. That's the cocktail party where you mentioned the Crazy Ivan theory. And before that, you were at a JP Morgan Chase World Bank private investor summit. All those things are not Main Street, right? Main Street is an auto body repair, a specialty printer. So my concern is on the tariffs. Who pays tariffs, Mr. Secretary?
Let's be clear about what Bernie Sanders argued during this hearing. According to Sanders, the legislation defended by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent would take hundreds of billions of dollars away from healthcare programs that serve low-income and working-class Americans, while providing an estimated $235 billion in estate tax relief to a very small number of the wealthiest families in the country. Sanders repeatedly asked Bessent to explain why this trade-off should be considered fair or beneficial. In Sanders' view, the Treasury Secretary did not directly answer that question. Sanders built his argument around what he described as a straightforward set of facts. He noted that a number of billionaires hold senior positions within the Trump administration and questioned whether it was merely a coincidence that the legislation includes substantial estate tax reductions benefiting the nation's wealthiest households. He explained that the estate tax applies only to the largest inheritances, meaning that expanding its exemptions primarily benefits families with enormous fortunes. Sanders argued that this is not a policy aimed at ordinary Americans or small businesses, but rather one that overwhelmingly benefits a small group of extremely wealthy families passing assets onto future generations. During the exchange, Bessent initially responded by referring to his own personal tax situation, saying that his taxes had increased under the 2017 tax law. Sanders dismissed that point, explaining that his question was not about Bessent personally, but about one specific provision of the legislation. Bessent then argued that the wealthiest Americans already pay a large share of total federal taxes. Sanders countered that this statistic did not address the issue at hand. He maintained that the real question was whether granting an estimated $235 billion in estate tax reductions to a small number of wealthy families could be justified on its own merits. As the discussion continued, Bessent argued that the proposal would also benefit small businesses. Sanders strongly rejected that claim, arguing that the estate tax exemption thresholds are so high that the overwhelming majority of small businesses would never be affected. In his view, the provision is designed primarily for the country's largest fortunes, not for typical family-owned businesses. Watch the exchange.